ABC General Hospital spoilers for Wednesday, April 8 reveal that, in Port Charles, the past never stays buried for long, but what makes it truly dangerous is not when it resurfaces loudly, but when it lingers quietly beneath conversations, shaping choices, tightening loyalties, and forcing people to decide just how much of themselves they are willing to sacrifice to protect what remains. That quiet tension is now threading through multiple lives at once, binding Isaiah, Portia, Sidwell, Ava, Carly, and those orbiting them into a web where every decision carries consequences that feel both immediate and inevitable. Isaiah's agreement to keep Portia's past hidden is not simply an act of loyalty. It is a burden he knowingly chooses to carry, fully aware that silence can be as destructive as truth when left unchecked. What binds them is not just shared history, but the weight of what that history could unravel if exposed. Portia, who has spent so much time carefully constructing a life that appears controlled and respectable, now finds herself facing the kind of fear that does not come from external threats alone, but from the possibility that someone close to her, someone perceptive and relentless like Stella, might begin to ask the right questions. Stella does not need proof to sense when something is wrong. Her instincts are enough, and that is precisely what makes her presence so unsettling. Every glance she gives, every subtle shift in her tone, feels like a probe beneath the surface, searching for fractures in a story that Portia is desperate to keep intact. For Isaiah, standing beside Portia means navigating a delicate balance between protection and self-preservation. He understands that by keeping her secret, he is also binding himself to it, becoming part of a narrative that could collapse under scrutiny at any moment. The more Stella pushes, the more the tension builds, not in dramatic confrontations, but in quiet exchanges where what is not said carries more weight than what is spoken. There is an unspoken question hovering between them. How long can this hold? And beneath that question lies a deeper, more unsettling truth, whether protecting Portia is worth the cost of losing control over his own fate. At the same time, another kind of darkness is taking shape elsewhere, one driven not by fear of exposure, but by the certainty of loss. Sidwell's grief over Marco's death is not the kind that softens a man or drives him toward reflection. It hardens him, reshapes him, strips away any hesitation that might have once existed. When he confides in Ava, it is not for comfort, but for clarity. He speaks not as a man seeking understanding, but as one who has already chosen his path. Sunny becomes the center of that path, not just as an enemy, but as a symbol of everything Sidwell believes has been taken from him. Ava, who has seen enough of the world to recognize the difference between anger and resolve, understands immediately that Sidwell is not speaking in hypotheticals. There is a cold certainty in his words, a finality that suggests he has already crossed the line between thought and action. What unsettles her is not just his desire for revenge, but the calmness with which he expresses it. This is not a man acting on impulse. This is someone who has accepted what he is about to do and is now preparing to execute it with precision. And in that realization, Ava is forced to confront her own position, whether she remains a silent observer or becomes entangled in something that could spiral far beyond her control. While grief fuels Sidwell's descent into vengeance, Carly is operating within a different kind of urgency, one defined by opportunity rather than loss. The movements of Brennan have not gone unnoticed, and Carly understands that moments like this, moments when powerful forces begin to shift, are rare and fleeting. She does not hesitate, she acts. But what drives her is not recklessness. It is calculation sharpened by years of navigating danger. The WSB has long operated in shadows, untouchable, insulated by layers of secrecy and influence. Taking it down requires more than force. It requires timing, precision, and the willingness to exploit whatever opening presents itself. That opening comes in a way no one anticipates. The accident involving Jordan and Curtis is not just a moment of chaos, it is a fracture in the structure that holds everything together. In the immediate aftermath, attention shifts, priorities realign, and for a brief but critical window, the focus of those who might otherwise interfere is pulled elsewhere. It is in that window that Carly sees her chance, not as a coincidence, but as an opportunity she refuses to let slip away. What makes this moment so dangerous is the convergence of intentions. Carly is moving forward with a plan that depends on disruption, on creating pressure where there was once stability. Sidwell is preparing to unleash his own form of destruction, driven by vengeance that does not consider collateral damage. And in the background, Isaiah and Portia are struggling to maintain control over a secret that could unravel under the slightest strain. None of these paths exist in isolation. They intersect, overlap, and influence one another in ways that no one fully sees yet. The accident itself becomes more than just an event, it becomes a catalyst. For Jordan and Curtis, it is a test of resilience, a moment that forces them to confront their own vulnerabilities. But for those watching from the outside, it is something else entirely. It is a distraction, a shift in focus, a crack in the system. Carly recognizes it immediately. She understands that the strongest structures are often undone not by direct attack, but by exploiting the moments when they are least prepared to defend themselves. And yet, even as she moves forward, there is an awareness, quiet but persistent, that what she is attempting carries risks that extend beyond her control. The WSB is not an enemy that can be easily dismantled. It is an institution built to survive, to adapt, to retaliate. Striking at it, even with precision, means inviting a response that could reach further than intended. But Carly has never been someone who steps back from that kind of risk. If anything, it is where she feels most alive, most certain of who she is. As these threads continue to tighten, the atmosphere in Port Charles shifts in ways that are subtle but undeniable. Trust becomes fragile. Alliances feel temporary. Every decision seems to carry an echo of something larger, something still unfolding. Isaiah and Portia remain locked in their silent struggle, aware that the truth is never as contained as they hope it to be. Sidwell moves closer to a point of no return, his grief transforming into something that demands action. Ava watches, caught between distance and involvement, knowing that neutrality may not be an option for much longer. And Carly advances, driven by a belief that the right moment, once recognized, must be seized regardless of the cost. What binds all of them together is not just circumstance, but the growing sense that everything is approaching a threshold. The kind of threshold that, once crossed, cannot be undone. And in that space, where secrets, vengeance, and ambition collide, the question is no longer who is right or wrong. It is who is prepared to endure what comes next when the consequences of these choices finally surface. In Port Charles, redemption is never a single moment. It is a fragile, uncertain process, shaped by guilt, hesitation, and the quiet hope that the future might still be rewritten before the past closes in completely. That fragile hope is exactly where Gio finds himself, as he stands before Sunny, not as an opponent, not as a rival, but as someone who understands perhaps too late the weight of the choices he has made. His apology is not dramatic, not filled with grand declarations. It is steady, deliberate, and grounded in the kind of self-awareness that only comes after everything has already begun to fall apart. For Sunny, who has spent a lifetime navigating betrayal and loyalty in equal measure, Gio's words are not easily accepted. Forgiveness has never been simple in his world. Every apology carries the question of motive. Every moment of vulnerability risks becoming a weakness others can exploit. And yet, there is something different in Gio's tone, something that does not feel calculated or defensive. It feels like someone who has reached the point where denial is no longer possible, where facing the consequences is the only path forward. That difference does not erase the past, but it complicates it, forcing Sunny to confront the possibility that not every fracture needs to end in destruction. What makes Gio's position even more precarious is that his apology is not just about repairing a relationship. It is about reclaiming a future that once seemed within reach but is now uncertain, fractured by everything that has come before. That future is tied to Emma, to the quiet possibility that together they can rebuild something that is not defined by the mistakes surrounding them. But reclaiming that future requires more than hope. It requires action, and more importantly, it requires confronting the systems and forces that have taken those opportunities away in the first place. Gio and Emma are no longer standing on the sidelines of events unfolding around them. They are beginning to push back, to assert their right to shape their own paths, instead of being defined by the decisions of others. That shift is subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it carries a growing intensity, because in Port Charles, reclaiming what was lost is never just a personal act. It is a challenge to the structures of power that allowed that loss to happen. And those structures do not yield easily. As Gio moves forward trying to prove that his apology is not empty, he is forced to navigate a delicate balance. Every step toward rebuilding trust risks reopening old wounds. Every attempt to assert himself risks drawing attention from those who would rather see him remain contained, controlled, or removed entirely. The future he envisions with Emma is not just uncertain, it is contested. And that tension transforms even the smallest victories into moments that feel fragile, temporary, as though they could be undone at any moment. While Geo is trying to rebuild, Britt is moving in the opposite direction, deeper into a conflict that offers no easy resolution and no safe retreat. Her actions against Cullum and the WSB are not impulsive, but they are undeniably dangerous. She is no longer content to observe or survive. She is questioning, probing, pushing against forces that are designed to remain hidden, untouchable, and unchallenged. And in doing so, she is placing herself directly in the path of something far more powerful than she may be prepared to face. Nathan's warning to Britt is not delivered as a threat, but as something far more unsettling, a recognition of the consequences that are already beginning to take shape. He understands the nature of the WSB, the way it operates, the way it responds to those who step out of line. His concern is not abstract. It is immediate, grounded in the knowledge that once Britt crosses a certain threshold, there will be no negotiation, no second chances. The system will respond, and when it does, it will not be subtle. But what complicates this dynamic is not just Britt's defiance, but her growing suspicion. There is something about Nathan that does not fully align, something in his behavior, his timing, his knowledge that begins to feel inconsistent. At first, it is only a feeling, a quiet unease that she cannot fully explain. But as she continues to push against Cullum and the WSB, that unease begins to sharpen into something more focused. Doubt, and doubt, once it takes hold, does not remain contained. It expands, connects, reshapes perception. Britt begins to look at Nathan differently, to reconsider past interactions, to question what she once accepted without hesitation. Every warning he gives now carries a double meaning. Is he protecting her, or is he steering her away from something she is getting too close to uncovering? Is his concern genuine, or is it part of a larger effort to control the narrative before it slips beyond reach? For Nathan, this shift is dangerous in ways that extend beyond Britt's suspicions alone. Because if she is right, if there is something he is hiding, then every moment he spends trying to guide her away from danger only deepens her mistrust. And if she is wrong, if his intentions are exactly what they appear to be, then her refusal to listen could push her into a situation she cannot escape. Either way, the balance between them is destabilizing, moving toward a point where trust may no longer be possible. As Britt continues to investigate, to resist, to question, she finds herself pulled further into a reality where certainty becomes increasingly difficult to hold on to. The lines between ally and enemy blur. The information she gathers feels incomplete, fragmented, as though she is only seeing part of a much larger structure. And at the center of that structure is the WSB, a force that does not reveal itself fully, that operates through layers of influence and control designed to prevent exactly the kind of exposure Britt is attempting to force. The more she pushes, the more isolated she becomes, not because people abandon her, but because the nature of what she is confronting creates distance. It makes others hesitate, step back, question whether involvement is worth the risk. And in that isolation, Britt is forced to rely on her own instincts, her own judgment, even as those instincts are being challenged by the growing uncertainty surrounding Nathan. Meanwhile, the paths of Geo and Britt, though seemingly separate, begin to echo one another in unexpected ways. Both are trying to reclaim something that feels unjustly taken. Both are pushing against forces that resist change. And both are discovering that the act of resistance itself carries consequences that are not always visible at the outset. Geo seeks redemption, a chance to rebuild trust and create a future that feels earned rather than inherited. Britt seeks truth, a way to expose what has been hidden and challenge a system that thrives on secrecy. But in Port Charles, those pursuits rarely remain clean or contained. They intersect with power, with history, with forces that do not simply allow themselves to be challenged without response. And as these tensions continue to build, the atmosphere shifts once again, becoming heavier, more uncertain, as though something is approaching just beyond the edge of perception. The apology that began as a moment of vulnerability becomes part of a larger struggle for control over the future. The warning that was meant to protect becomes a catalyst for suspicion. And the search for truth begins to reveal not just answers, but deeper, more unsettling questions. In that space where redemption and danger exist side by side, the choices these characters make will not just define their own paths, but reshape the balance of everything around them. Because in a world where trust is fragile and power is rarely what it seems, even the smallest decision can set into motion consequences that cannot be undone. And for Geo, for Britt, and for those drawn into their orbit, the question is no longer whether they can change what comes next, but whether they are prepared to face what that change will cost.